Well, now on a story we brought you earlier, Antony Blinken has been criticising China's behaviour. He's done so in a speech in New Zealand. Joining us live is Gordon Flake. He's the CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre. He joins me in the studio. Good to see you. Thanks for your time, Gordon.
Good to be here, thanks.
As always. We saw Blinken describing China's behaviour in the Pacific as problematic. In particular, he was referring to a lot of the aid contributions we're seeing from China. How is their aid different to our aid in terms of the money flowing through and the significance of that?
Like on many issues, it's about transparency. It's about whether or not they're supporting more dictatorial impulses within society there. So there are individual political leaders who are not supportive of democracy, not supportive of the voice of the people, so to speak. And their aid is taking the form of police forces and other things that are a bit concerned about. We've seen, particularly in countries like the Solomon Islands, this has really become a question of relative influence in the region, and it's a question of the relative unanimity of the Pacific Islands Forum. And so there is some divide and conquer action going on there, which is a classic Sun Tzu type behavior, if you will.
And so how does a country like Australia, with the help of the US, try to counter this? I mean, we don't want to get into an aid sort of bidding war in these nations, do we?
No, and obviously individual nations there do have some advantage of trying to play one country off against the other. The advantage that I think Australia has, and what it needs to remember, is that it's not alone. Between Australia and New Zealand in the immediate neighborhood, you've also got the real U.S. interest, Japanese interest. South Korea hosted a Pacific Island summit along with our Deputy Premier and Defense Minister Richard Marles just back in May. And India is increasingly expressing its interest. And so I think we need to make it clear that we have an interest in keeping our near neighborhood and our region and our Pacific family, if you will, part of the family.
And speaking of family, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been in New Zealand this week. Antony Blinken, as we've been reporting, is there as well. Blinken did also suggest that there could be a role for New Zealand to play in some of the AUKUS projects. No doubt AUKUS will be a big topic of discussion tomorrow at AUSMIN. These diplomats like their acronyms, AUSMIN, these bilateral talks that we hold regularly with the US.
So when we say AUKUS, people think about just the submarine. And the reality is AUKUS is much broader than that. There's an entire second pillar, which is really technology cooperation. And other treaty allies of the United States, like Japan, like Korea, like New Zealand, from day one have expressed an interest in being part of that. And that's very natural. The submarine project itself is a really difficult, heavy lift. And the general feeling, I think, is we've got to get AUKUS right first before we talk about expanding it to be JAUKUS or NUZAUKUS, if we wanted to add New Zealand in there. But I don't think there's any resistance whatsoever for looking at ways where the AUKUS partners can cooperate with other like-minded partners like New Zealand, Japan, Korea, et cetera.
And, well, we just had another story earlier in the bulletin about cooperating with Korea. This is a pretty significant announcement in terms of defence.
It is. You know, we as a society have long been used to relying on Korea for consumer goods like phones and TVs and for commercial goods for our industry. But somehow when it comes to defense industry, we've always thought that the goods had to come from the United States or Europe at twice the price and a much longer supply chain timeline. Increasingly, I think we are recognizing that Japan and Korea, with their industrial might, now newly turning towards defense industry, can provide us some of what we need. And so the announcement about the Hanwha deal today, I think is a positive development. I think we're going to see a lot more of those going forward to our benefit.
And when we look at announceables, do we expect any big announceables out of AUSMIN tomorrow in terms of the talks? We know that obviously AUKUS is the defence priority here. You know,
the one thing that struck me, AUSMIN for your viewers is the ministerial meetings 2+2, defence and foreign ministers on both the United States and the Australian side. What's always struck me is not the big announceable, but the full breadth of what they talk about. There's almost not a sector or an issue that they're not working on. And it gives you an idea of how deeply intertwined the United States and Australia are in security, in intelligence, in economics, in foreign policy. And so what I think you're going to see, again, is rather than a big announceable, you're going to see a remarkable breadth of areas of cooperation where our recently announced Defense Strategic Review and the implementation plan for AUKUS are then implemented as part of a broader part of the alliance cooperation.
And a common theme, you think, would be China and the rise of China and how Australia is strategically placed in terms of that. Taiwan is obviously taking the China threat very seriously. We saw these military drills over the last few days, which were very serious. Is the threat there stable, do you think, or is it increasing?
No, it's no question it's growing, and there's growing Taiwanese awareness of the threat. So just to put context, 35 years ago when I lived in South Korea, every month they had civil defense drills with tanks rolling down the streets and sirens going off. That was the norm because there was a thought of an imminent North Korean threat. Over time, those disappeared. Taiwan had them. They disappeared during a time of rapprochement between Taiwan and the mainland, and as tensions ratchet up, I think that the fact that the Taiwanese civil authorities think there's a need to remind the people of the imminent threat tells you it is increasing. No question about it.
We've just weaved our way through most of the Asia-Pacific region, but there's one more thing I wanted to ask you in relation to China, and that is the disappearance of China's foreign minister. What's your understanding of what's going on there?
So it's a really interesting thing, and there's a lot of speculation, a lot of it quite salacious. We don't know the details, but we do know that the previous foreign minister, Qin Gang, was seen to be as a hand-picked individual, a rising star close to President Xi Jinping. He has disappeared for a month, and finally the announcement was made that he's no longer foreign minister and that the previous foreign minister, Wang Yi, is back in the job, a state councillor. And so all of a sudden the question is, what gives? What happened? And it really drives home the fundamental concern that people have about transparency. China passed a law earlier this year that made it basically a criminal offense to share information on the basic economic data of their internal corporations. And so as we try to deal with China economically and trade and investment, diplomatically, if their foreign minister has been erased from their website and all references have been erased to the website, you referenced Tony Blinken earlier on, all mentions of Qin Gang's meeting a month ago with Tony Blinken are now gone in China.
Oh,
so
goodness.
Did it really happen? So it just tells you one of the challenges we're going to face going forward.
Very bizarre. Gordon Flake, always appreciate your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.